G'day, Ben from Duck Plain Chicken here with the second video in this build series. And this one's all going to be about the painting, decals and the bases. So first of all I want to talk about the paint that I'm going to use. First of all, everything is going to get primed with the Surfacer Grey. And then we're looking at essentially three different colours. We've got the black, which is the undercolour for these two, and then we've got two types of grey. So we've sort of got a mid grey and a light grey. So I wanted to talk about my colour selection, and I don't know how these will go until I've actually painted it, but first of all, for the black I'm going to be using camo black. So it's just a tad lighter than sort of straight black. So I'll be using that for these two here. For the ships that are the two-tone grey, I'll be using a combination of SMS US medium grey and neutral grey. So you can see it's a bit hard to tell on the screen. The neutral grey is a bit lighter, and I know from experience that when these are painted on a surface and there's a flat coat put over the top of them, this actually comes up quite a bit lighter. So even though it looks pretty close there, I think it should be okay once I've put a matte coat down. So that's really it as far as the colour selection. There's not a lot of colour going on here. A lot of it is sort of more from the decals themselves. So there is an indication of sort of red on these little ports on the side here. I'm not sure if I'll do those, but if I do, it'll be with just some enamel red or something like that. But I think they're quite small on the ship, if I remember right. Well, let's have a look at them. Yeah, they're pretty small. It's these 3 bits here, so maybe just a dab of enamel in there. I mean, the thing is, it's quite, the one that's not going to have the decals is going to look a little bit plain, so it'd be nice to put a little bit more colour in there if possible. Alright, so on to priming, and then I'll show you the progress of the painting. So I've been looking at the colours for the two grey ships that I'm doing. So Domino's the third and also the other one from 2202. And it's really difficult to tell from this cover illustration on the box where the light grey is and where the mid grey is. There's indications of light grey on the fins, but it's a bit hard to tell. So delved into the archives, and there's the series of books from Space Battleship Yamato 2199, which they call the official setting document or official setting materials. And they did one for the Earth forces and also for the Gumlers, which is what this one is. And thankfully, this has a lot more detail about these particular craft and the colour. So here we can see the illustration that features on the box. But here we're given a bit more of an indication of where the delineation between the two greys. And looking at this, there's actually a third grey, which is these intakes, which is a dark grey. So for that, I think I'm going to use SMS German grey. And also for the outlets for the engines here, they're also in that dark grey. But you can clearly see that there is a light grey stripe around these intakes. Also on the intakes around the bridge here, and also on the fins, so right on the edge of the fins, and so it just makes it a bit clearer. There's also sort of a little bit of other detail on the sort of saucer section. There's like this purple marking. I'm not sure if I'll bother putting that in. I think that's is it the glass? Yeah, I think that's actually the glass of sort of the bridge. I'm not sure if I'll put that on. The detail of that's going to be so small on the Mecha Colle kit, so I don't think it's going to be worth doing. But at least now I've got a better idea of the delineation. So it's going to take some pretty, detail masking in order to get that to work. And so that's what I'll be working on next. I've sprayed on the light grey that I'm using first, so you can sort of see the areas where that I'll be doing the masking, and of course I'll be masking those areas off. And then probably what I'll do is I'll do the outlets or the exhausts here in the dark grey I'm using, which is German grey, and then I'll mask those off, and then I'll do the mid grey. So I just thought I'd take this opportunity to sort of show you some of the masking techniques that I use, and it's certainly not the only way to do it. But this piece in here, it's got some pretty strong panel lines that I can use, you know, to lay the tape down, and then use a very sharp scalpel blade to cut around the edges. So I've got a number 11 blade here, brand new one, nice and sharp. I have a selection of Tamiya tape. So the first thing I'm going to do is lightly just sort of get the tape started, and I want it to sort of go around this this edge here. And then what I do is I take a toothpick, and I use the toothpick starting at one end to burnish it into those gaps. And what that does is it gives you a very clear idea of where you should be laying your knife and cutting that masking tape. So that way you should get a relatively clean edge. And you know, I know some people will cut up very small pieces of tape and do it that way, but I tend to find that this is a method that, for me anyway, is a bit quicker. Just carefully running the blade right up into the corners, following the panel lines. And it's a matter of just taking my tweezers and carefully pulling away, making sure that all those corners are cut. And then I'll go around again and just burnish it down with the toothpick, just so it's nice and clean in those, you know, down nice and hard in those crevices. And I will repeat that process for the other side. Just get started on one side. Again, I'm just burnishing down, just following those natural panel line edges. And then taking my brand new scalpel blade, running it along. Make sure you get it right in the corners. Okay, and it's a matter of running away the tape. And again, just burnishing it down with a toothpick, just so that that tape is well and truly stuck down. Okay, so I'll finish the rest of that off camera, but essentially it's just that you know, all I have to do is sort of that top bit. The next bit I'm going to do is the leading edges of these intakes along here. Now these are basically a stripe. There is a panel line there that you can follow, but based on the illustrations I saw, it's sort of just more of a straight line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my Azu tape, which is 0.4 millimeters. So this stuff is super thin, but you can use, you know, Tamiya tape or whatever other tape you use. Scissors. This stuff is so fine. It'll be interesting to see how I go getting this on camera without getting my head in the way. Alright, so what I tend to find for this stuff is just to get it sort of at least started somewhere. And then you can actually sort of push it to the starting point that you want and burnish it down. And then just lay it across. And to just follow that leading edge. Now I'm not quite sure how well this is actually going to hold up after I've sprayed it, to tell you the truth. It is very fine, and if I lose the if the paint finds its way under, then there's not much I can do about it. But hopefully it'll give at least an indication of a racing stripe, or whatever it's supposed to be. Okay, I could do the other side with it tape worked out just to be the right length. There we go. Alright, and I cut off the excess with the scalpel. Well, there's not much excess there. Okay, so that's how I'm, how I'm sort of masking the bits on the main hull. The next one is one of these intakes, which I'm doing a little bit differently. So first I'm putting it on a clip, because just it'll make it a bit easier to sort of hold on to. And then instead of the 0.4mm tape, I'm going to use Tamiya 1mm tape, because the band on these intakes is a little bit wider. And again, I have no idea how well this is going to actually come out. It's might be all sort of for naught. That's all right. Okay, now I'm going to start on the longest edge first, and I just want it to sort of follow that contour as best I can. The curve's quite severe on one side, so it makes it a little bit harder. But if we get that started, then what I do is I sort of fold it up over itself, finish it down a little bit better, try to get a continual band of tape around that very sharp corner. It's not playing nice while I'm doing it on camera. Right, let's try that. Just gently sort of getting it to follow the curve. There are a few sort of wrinkles in it, but I don't think that'll be an issue. Alright, then we can trim that off. Amazes me how well this tape sticks to itself when you don't want it to, and then when you do want it to, it doesn't. Okay, trim that and burnish that down. Okay, so you can sort of see what that masking is like. So what I'm going to do for these intakes, they will be painted with the German grey for the inside of the intakes. Then I'll mask that off and paint the outside, what I'm calling the mid grey. Alright, so there's that one. Now the bridge, I originally thought the bridge was all of one colour, but until you see the back of it, these intake side bits, they're the mid grey, and so is the back of the bridge. So we have to do a bit of fiddly masking for this one. And again, I'll be using the panel lines that we've got there to determine where I cut the tape out. Now this is getting a bit silly as far as the level of detail I'm going here. Yeah, I think it would be fine if you just painted the bridge in the light grey and didn't bother with masking it. Oh, we stuffed up there, taken off the the wrong side of the tape. I've done that before, where you're masking and you pull up the bit that you actually needed to stay down. So, kind of get a bit of an idea what's happening there. And again, I'll follow that process, the same process, and get everything masked up. So I'm ready for the next round of painting. Just to let you have a look at the masking before I do the next lot of painting. One thing I didn't show was the masking of the fins, but that was pretty straightforward. It's just a little bit of tape on the end, again following the existing panel lines that are there. And the bridge looks a bit messy, but I've used some what's this stuff? Mr. Masking Sol, and that's really just to sort of fill in some of the gaps that I saw for the tape. But you can see the back bit is going to be the mid grey, and of course the front and the source is going to be the light grey, and both the intakes have been masked. So onto some painting. So as you can probably see here, I've sprayed the exhausts here in the German grey. Problem is, I've had all sorts of issues trying to mask it. It's just such a sort of shallow and difficult shape to mask. I've tried blue tack and stuff, and nothing's sort of really working for me. So I think what I'll end up doing is I'll end up using some Tamiya enamel. So XF63 German grey. It's probably not exactly the same grey as the SMS German grey, but it's going to be close enough. So I'll put a once I've done a gloss coat, I'll put the enamel on, and then it's nice and easy. I can sort of lay it in there and clean it up relatively easily. However, for the main side intakes, I have actually sprayed the inside of those with the SMS German grey, and so now I've just masked that off with blue tack, and it's ready for the main, the mid grey, as I'm calling it. Alright, so I've taken off all the masks, and I've had mixed results. The facade collectors, they look alright. The white sort of separation of a lot of the parts is okay on these grey ones. The leading edge of these intakes I'm not really that happy with, but I'm going to live with it. The pinstriping on the back here worked okay. Probably could have been a bit thicker, I don't know, but anyway, it's there. So it's not perfect, but I think once I get sort of a panel line wash in there, it's not going to be as sort of noticeable the problems I've got with that masking. So anyway, and of course for the camo black ones, there was very little masking on it. It was just basically those side areas there, that was it. Everything else is sort of the same colour. I may go in on the engines and use the enamel German grey, but I don't know how obvious that'll be. It'll probably not be worth doing, but I'll have a look at it once I've got a gloss coat on. Okay, I've started the decals for the three ships that require them, and I'm going to show you some tricks, because these decals are fantastic as far as they're nice and thin. They go down really well, and they look fantastic on the kit, but there is some things to be mindful of. So just to give you an idea of how kind of intricate these things are, and I mean, it hasn't got a flat coat on it yet, but once it does, once it has a wash, panel line wash, and a flat coat, that is just going to look amazing. So these decals, they look great. Probably on this one it's maybe a little bit easier to sort of see. Look how intricate those patterns are. Now I haven't sort of finished this one yet, but you're just getting a bit of an idea of the level of detail they go into. See all that intricate pattern in there. So I'm still sort of working on them, but to show you, probably the best one to show is one of these grey ones with their blue decals. If we have a look at this set of decals here, the issues that I've found previously with doing the others is if I hold it in light right, let's see if we can kind of capture this, you can kind of see they are pre-cut, but the carrier film sort of goes outside of the illustrative bit. And what you want to do is you want to cut as close to the pattern as you can. So you actually want to cut sort of, even though the decals are pre-cut, you need to cut them closer. And where you've got holes, like in the center of this piece here, you want to actually cut those holes out. And the reason for that is because they correspond to protrusions in the model kit. So if you don't cut them out, it's actually a lot more difficult to sort of get them to conform to the shape. So, and also things like this center piece in here, cut that U-shape out there. There's the bits here where the Bassard collectors go, cut them out as well, and you'll just find your life goes a lot easier. So the first one I did, I sort of just used the decals, as they came off, but I found that cutting them closer to that pattern makes life a lot easier, and they actually fit a lot better. So for that, I'm using a scalpel, and I'm going to start by I'll start with this top one here, and what I'm going to do is carefully cut out the center piece here. Now the nature of the pattern on these decals means that if you cut into the pattern, it's not going to make a massive difference. It's not going to be a problem. You can see there, I've just cut out that center piece, and that corresponds to this kind of raised piece on the top here. So it's just going to be easy if that's pre-cut out. Now with the rest of it, I'm going to cut as close to the design as possible without destroying the pattern. I mean, in some places the decals are cut, pre-cut really close, but I found it's still not close enough. It's still problematic when you try to get the decal to sort of conform properly. Okay, so just to give you sort of an idea of how close I've gone, you can see I've gone pretty tight around that design. And the next step is to soak it in water. And I've said this in the past, I don't use heated water, it's just straight tap water. Using heated water will speed up the separation of the decal from the backing sheet, but I don't find it's really that necessary. Now, if you haven't seen any of my other videos where I've done decaling work before, there's only sort of a few things you need for working with decals. I tend to use things like cotton buds. I'll use a toothpick to move the decal around on the surface, just because it hasn't got a super sharp point on it. I'll use decal tweezers. They've got this sort of blunt end and nice and flat connection point here. I'll use just a couple of old brushes for putting on microset and microsole. So microset is what you put down first, and what that does is it reduces the surface tension of the decal, on the surface of the model. It also softens the decal a little bit. Microsol you put on afterwards, and that kind of melts the carrier film on the decal, so it makes it look a bit more like a painted surface rather than a wood slide decal. And of course you need some sort of knife to cut the decals out, but that's pretty much it. Now I found with these decals they do take a little bit to come loose from the backing paper, but I think that's probably because it's so cold in my shed at the moment. That's probably the reason why. Okay, I can see the decal is coming loose from the backing sheet. So I can now prepare my surface using the microset. And I will just use that quite liberally on the surface where the decal is going to go. And using decal tweezers, I will dab off the excess water. Use the toothpick to slide the decal off. In this case it might be easier with my finger. And so I'm just gently manipulating the decal into place. You don't want to be too forceful with it, because especially if you cut the decals out closer to the edges of the pattern, there'll be areas that are likely to tear. I just want to be really gentle in positioning it, and I'm just taking a cotton bud and just gently trying to roll it across. I've found in some areas I couldn't even do that, so some of the other sort of more intricate decals that go on, like the side of the bridge, really difficult to get a cotton bud in there. So what I've been doing is dabbing off all the excess water, putting the decal down, and then just smothering it in microsol. And eventually you can sort of squeeze the water out using, cotton buds that have got like a finer point on them. But the microsol goes a long way in making the decal conform. So with the microsol, literally, again, I'm quite liberal with it. And you really want to get it around those edges, because that's where the solution will suck in underneath the decal, and it'll help pull that decal into place. Okay, now it's probably a little bit hard to tell on camera, but there is a little bit of the decal hanging over the edge here, and it hasn't sort of pulled down onto the back yet. What I'll do is I'll wait a bit for the microsol to do its thing and soften up the decal, and then I'll just gently push it down into shape. I'll just gently coax it into position, and then I'll sort of leave that for a while. You can see that that hole there, and the shape there sort of is built around on the bridge. Okay, so I'll move on to cutting out the rest of the decals and move along. Now these larger decals, there's these little sort of cutouts along here that you do want to actually cut out, because they correspond to like this block here, and also these intakes, and so they'll just go down a bit easier if you cut those out. Now when you put these big ones down, you will see a lot of wrinkles. You'll see a lot of sort of areas where, potentially water's getting trapped under and what have you. But don't worry about it. That's what the microsol is for. You can push out some of these bubbles, but a lot of the others you're not going to be able to. So let's get the other one in place, and then I can start putting the microsol on those. Those are a bit tricky to drag around. I think Bandai have done a really good job. These are, although they're quite thin, they seem reasonably sturdy. Reasonably durable, I should say. And what I'm doing here is I'm sort of looking down the top because I really want to get it as symmetrical as possible. So that's what I'm sort of aiming for. And there's points of the decals that you can see that sort of line up with particular details of the hull. And that's a good way of working out whether you've got it symmetrical or not. Alright, so now I'm going to put some good amount of microsol down on those. Again, you want to get that microsol around the edges. You want it to suck up, you want it to suck under the decal carrier film and wick its way underneath. That's where it can work its magic. Alright, so you can see there's lots of big wrinkles there, there's lots of areas where it's not bedding down properly. I'm not worried about that at all. I'm going to let the microsol do its thing. I'll give it another coat in about half an hour, and I'll just keep doing that over and over again. And eventually what you get are decals that are conforming quite well to the surface. Probably a bit hard to see on that one. But on this one, certainly, you know, you can see even those panel lines are coming out. You can see those raised bumps. You know, the decals sort of sucked around those. There's a couple of air pockets that what I'm going to do is I'm going to prick them with the scalpel just to allow that air to come out, because that will cause silvering, of course. But overall, it's come up pretty well. I've finished all the decal work, and just a word of warning, you need a lot of patience. It's taken a lot of decal softener to make sure that the decals conform to the shape properly. I've had to sort of punch some small holes in to get rid of some air gaps. I've put the gloss coat, you can see the gloss coat over the top of it. And it doesn't appear that I've got any silvering, so I'm sort of pretty happy about that. But if you take your time with the decals, I spent a couple of days just doing a coat, decal softener, leaving it for an hour or so, come back, give it another coat, keep doing that over and over again. And what's happened is it's conformed really well, and the decals do look great. They really look fantastic on the kit. So the next step, now that I've put a gloss coat on top, the next step is to do the panel line wash. And for that I am using some thin down XF63, so this is to me is enamel paint, and I've just sort of thinned it down in a little bottle with some enamel thinner, X20. I have put a little bit in a cup, and I've got a brush here which I'm going to load up. And then, as with any sort of panel lining, it is just a actually might be easier to see underneath. Let's see. Just have to touch it because it's so thin. Let the capillary action do its thing. You'll see the stuff's really thin. Like there's not a lot of sort of not a lot of pigment in there because I have thinned it down quite a bit, but it works pretty well. You know, I didn't want to go with black on these grey ones just because I thought it would be just a little bit too sort of obvious, or a little bit too contrasty for my liking. Get quite a bit in this these front bits here. And what I can do is, if I'm not happy with the amount of colour that's sort of trapped in the panel lines, I can always go over it again. And so that's pretty much it. There's nothing sort of special about that. I've made a bit of a mess, but I will go up and clean that up later. So I'll go ahead and do the rest of them. For the black craft, well, it's actually, I think I used camo black if I remember rightly. I have actually done a panel line wash on it, but it's really quite difficult to sort of see, so I'm not sure how well that'll come up in the final result. And unfortunately, I won't really know until I put a flat coat on it. That sort of makes it really obvious. So for the darker ones, I've just used panel line accent color black. So I've done the panel lining, and you can see I've left quite a bit of a mess there, but I'm quite happy with the colour of that panel line. It's nice and sort of subtle. So in order to clean it up, I'll just be using this stuff, Shellite, but you can use lighter fluid or enamel thinner. And then I'll take a cotton bud, just got a small jar here of Shellite, just to make it a bit easier. I dab the excess on a paper towel, and then I rub gently over the top, and just cleaning it up. And I'll repeat that process. I'll go over the whole ship once, and then I'll let it dry for a bit. And then I'll go back and make sure I haven't missed any spots, because once you put a flat coat down, that's it. So I'm going to go through and do the rest of the cleanup, and then we'll be ready for a matte coat. So time to start working on the bases for these craft. And anyone who's watched any of my previous builds of Mecha Colle kits will know I like these things. These are clear acrylic boxes that come with just a lid on the bottom. Or the top, I should say. They're about 5.5 centimeters cubed, which I find is a really good size. You've got plenty of room for putting any electronics on. The other thing you can do is you've got, room to sort of drill a hole in the side for a switch. And I've also got these USB power ports. So these take a USB-C, and they're wired up. You'll notice they only have red and a black wire coming out the back of them. That's because all it's doing is taking the power from the USB port. There's no sort of data. These things I buy on AliExpress, and they come with this little connector here, which I'll just I'll snip off. I don't actually need that. I'll just all hardwire it in. And as far as the sort of preparation and cleanup of the acrylic box goes, there is this pour, what would you say, pour mark, where they've poured the acrylic into the mold. And it's not perfectly flat, so I do need to sand that and putty that up. With a lot of the kits, I'll drill a hole in the center, and that's where the post will go that's holding up the ship. But in this case, because, look at this one here, because the post is towards the back of the ship, what I'm going to do is put the post sort of towards the back of the base. And to give you an example of that, here's one I've done previously, so you can see it's not sort of centered, it's towards the back. And we've got the USB port and the switch, and I've just painted that with SMS black primer, and it's given it a matte coat to protect it a bit, and it comes up pretty well. So do some cleanup, and to give you an example of what I use I use a bit of Tamiya white putty. So you can see I've been sanding the top and using a bit of Tamiya white putty, and then I'll go in and if there's any sort of marks left, I'll go in with a bit of the Mr. Surfacer 500 over the top of it, just to fill up any of those sort of smaller gaps and what have you. So I'll go through that, do that for the 4 bases, drill the holes, get them painted, and then we should be well on our way. Okay, I have put the matte coat down, and it has come up pretty well. There is some very small spots of silvering, but going over it with a decal solution made a hell of a difference. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So as you can see, this one is mounted on the sort of base I usually do, which is with a USB-C and a little switch. So I'm going to take you through how I went about that. First of all, I've got my box here, and you can see there's still a little bit of a shadow of the puttying I did, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. It's interesting because you can't actually feel it. Normally, you know, with your finger you can sort of feel a something like that. So eventually I might go back and, you know, putty that up again, sand it back, and do it. But for now, I'm not too fussed. So I've already installed the USB-C power socket, and so out of this will be the negative and the positive. Now the switch will be going through this hole, so the positive for this needs to be hooked up to the switch. So let's do that. Now before I do that, I need to get some heat shrink on. Always remember to do that before you solder your wire up, and you can't get any heat shrink on. Now I've already tinned all my wires and the connectors on the button, so I've done that off camera because I don't think you need to see that. I'll move this heat shrink into place. Now the next step is a little bit strange. Normally you don't have to go about this, but I haven't planned properly, and I don't have enough of the right resistors that I need. So what I've created is it's what's called a header connector, and it's basically got two points on the back of it and two holes. And what that means is I'll be able to take one of my resistors. If I cut this off, and yeah, the problem was I didn't order enough of the right resistors a while back, so I've got to get another shipment. But for now, what I can do is use a resistor that's a different value. And so what I've done is I've just bent it over and cut the ends, and then that will fit into the header connector like that. It's something I've used in another one of my builds, and I find it's really helpful if you if you think you're ever going to change out the resistor at another time, then this is a really good way of doing it. You can always sort of putty it up if you're worried about it coming undone, but it seems to work for me. So what I need to do is, of course, the resistor needs to go between the switch and the red wires, or the positive wires from the LEDs. So again, using my helping hands. Okay, and heat shrink over that. So I'm going to use my little heat gun here. Now the heat shrink's probably not required here, but I do it just to make sure that there's not any sort of potential of shorting. So the next step is to hook up the LEDs, the negatives to the black wire, and the positives, of course, to the red wire. So let's get ship here. So what I've done is I've taken the masking off the post. I've also joined up the two thin wires for both the red and the black, just to make it a bit easier. Now I've given myself plenty of wire here, and the reason for that is that I can actually do all this wiring without worrying about sort of knocking the ship itself. Okay, so now it's really important at this stage, so I need to make sure the red pokes out through the hole where the switch goes, and the black will go out the bottom to join up with the other one. I need some heat shrink to put on these wires before I solder them up. Get a bit more solder on that one. It's going to make life a bit easier. those two up. So that one can be trimmed a little bit. Need that extra wire on it. And so like the connector. All right, I think we are there. Okay, so the first thing to do is put my resistor in, or otherwise nothing will happen at all. Get that in and then feed this through. Now the good thing about these sort of sizable bases, I've got plenty of room for the wire to sort of, you know, gather up inside. So that's just a press fit button. That sort of tucked in there. Now I should be able to feed the rest of these wires down and just set the post in place. So I won't be gluing the post, like it's just going to be, again, pressure fit. Alright, now the real test is whether the lights still work. That looks promising. Yeah, I can't see any of the engine lights, and I think I know why. I'll just quickly point that out. So it happened on the other one as well. I did actually go back with a bit of enamel paint and paint it in the dark grey, German grey, in those exhaust wells or whatever they are. So I need to actually go back in there with a drill, because what's happened is the paint's covered up the holes. So I'm just going to lightly, I'm not really drilling it out, I'm just trying to clear out the paint that's clogging up the hole. So this, of course, the version without the decals on it. Came up pretty well, I think. Panel lines are pretty subtle, but they are there. But yeah, that's, you know, that's pretty much it. I've just got to drill out, yeah, the rest of these light holes, and then I think it's ready for some glamour shots. So just some thoughts on the kits before I sort of show the final shots. First of all, these are probably some of the simplest to put together, like simplest Mecha Colle kits I've come across. They're not really that fiddly, there's only sort of a few parts. They're actually really straightforward to put together. So even if all you did was you know, take the parts off the sprues, put down the decals and give it a, you know, a pin wash and a matte coat, it would come up really well. So as far as what I did with them, the decals, you do need patience if you want to do them properly, in order for them to sort of, you know, sit and conform really well. You do need to use a lot of micro, in my case micro sol, but just a decal softening solution. Yeah, so the decals just take a bit of patience. I did a whole lot of, you know, somewhat fiddly masking, but I didn't have any major dramas with the masking. Pretty simple shapes to sort of follow. It did help having the rear fins off to mask those, and also the top, the bridge, so that helps if you want to, you know, mask them off. But great little kits, these ones. So on to the glamour shots, and until next video series, I'll catch you later.